this set up here. All right. So when it says we're live, that means what it says it means. So, all right, we can live with that, I think. So let me give Josh a little more of the camera here, and this is what I warned you about. You got to be uncomfortably close to the host, and so anyway, good morning, everyone. Lance Tarchioni, as you know, here with you on Ask the Agronomist. We're live from St. Louis, so I didn't get some new decor on my walls at home. We're in a conference room in St. Louis, and I believe this is our building, right? I think so. This used to be back when I was a young pup here at Monsanto. These were chemistry labs, and this is where some of the back when Monsanto was in chemical discovery and doing more, herbicide type research. A lot of that went on here. We kind of exited that business years and years ago. We're back in it now with Bayer, but at other places. And this facility kind of got turned into a really nice conference center, meeting space, that kind of stuff. So I'm actually downstairs in a meeting at 8:00. Josh Tooley, who's my special guest here this morning, I'll let Josh introduce himself here in a bit. Is joining me here. We're starting early so that Josh can get to work and I can get to my meeting, and you guys can still be here with us on Ask the Agronomist. So appreciate Josh coming in early. There's some of these St. Louis folks, they bankers hours down here. They come in at 9, leave at 3. Josh got up really early this morning, came in, and I'm kidding because Josh works longer days than I do. So Josh and I spent a little time together in the field when he was a technical agronomist. So he used to be a peon like me. He's going places in the world. So he took a big promotion and took a really cool, really interesting, really demanding, I think, role. This your job's burned out a lot of people, Josh. They, a couple of years in this role seems to be all people can stand. So I don't know what your future career plans are, but I'll let Josh explain what he does. It's a job that if I was smarter and paid more attention to detail and didn't mind traveling, I would like to have Josh's job. But because of those three things, I'm not interested in Josh's job, but I'm glad he's got it. We all love it in Illinois when one of our own ends up in this role. And we've actually been pretty lucky, or in my tenure at Monsanto and now Bayer, there's been a lot of former Illinois people or people with connections to Illinois that are in this role. And when he explains what that is, it might make a little more sense to you why I like that. We expect, blatant favoritism from Josh and his role to make sure his home state is taken care of. So anyway, if you have questions, please ask them. There may be, I'll give you a little bit of a warning. Josh knows things that he can't talk about. And I'm aware of some of the things he can't talk about, so I won't ask him questions. If you happen to ask him a question of something he can't talk about, he'll be nice about it, but he may not be able to answer the question. But if it's, good old homegrown agronomy, silage, you can ask Josh all your silage questions. He may mention his connection to silage. If you notice, DEKALB has all of a sudden, there's a lot more silage stuff you're seeing. He's got something to do with that. And as a former beef producer myself, I'm not the dairyman he is. So I'm he's way more of a nutritionist than we beef cattle guys are. But I always like silage, and I always wish we would devote a little more attention to that. It's not a question. I get silage questions more than sorghum questions in Illinois, but not a lot more. But anyway, I'll quit yakking here, and I'll let Josh Tooley introduce himself, and we'll kind of kick things off. So
yeah, no, thanks, Lance, for having me on. Pleasure to be here. So Josh Tooley. So my role within Bayer is I'm the technical product lead for DEKALB. And so what that role does is I connect our FSRs or TAs to our breeding program. They tell me what they need, what their needs are in the field, what growers are wanting. I take those requests back to our breeding pipeline. I spend most of my summers walking fields, look at that pipeline. And then in the fall, whenever you guys see new products talked about, I roll those out and decide which ones go into the DEKALB brand.
Mm-hmm. And these plots you're walking, they're all over the country, right?
Correct. Yeah. We have breeding plots, I think last counted in 16 states, okay. Pretty well from Texas to the Dakotas and as far east as the Carolinas.
Okay. Yeah. So and you're probably spend what, 3 months ish, 2 or 3 months, maybe
about 3 months.
Yeah.
Usually we start walking, our guys in Texas right now, they're actually finishing up planting.
Yeah, I saw a picture of some approaching V2 corn somewhere in southern Texas yesterday.
Yeah, they've been planting since about the second week of February. Our breeder plots went in 2 weeks ago now, so they're up and going. So about the week after July 4th, I'll go out and start walking Texas and slowly work my way north and east to there, finish in first week of October, usually kind of as you get into Dakotas, Minnesota area.
Yeah. So one thing that a lot of our customers probably, wouldn't understand or appreciate is, how tight the timelines are to get those plots out, get that data. The breeders go through it, you go through it, make those selections, and then how all that process goes. The role I'm in, the role Josh used to be in, we get involved in this process in about early December, late November at what we call a new product rollout meeting. He's been in the process all year long. We get in later, and then we get into plot seed and all that stuff. But he's the guy that's selecting the stuff that will become products that I see for the first time in a market development plot. So we're shipping market development plot seed in now. One of my FSRs was sorting her plot seed yesterday. I still need to get that done with mine. Josh allocate, if he's got, he's the guy that's got to decide, okay, Lance, you only get 3 bags of this, and somebody else is going to get 6 bags of that. And we had a lot of products this year that you did have to kind of dole out that way, because we didn't have a super abundance of plot seed of some of these hot new products that you picked.
Yeah, and some of them too, we kind of went with the broad. This year we had some opportunity to go for some really widespread products, which then spreads our plot seed across a lot more acres.
Meaning it fits a huge geography.
Can go from Nebraska to the East Coast.
Which is every big seed company's dream, is to find products like that. And so I guess talk about that a little bit. I mean, I think we've got a pretty good mix in DEKALB of products that, are, use corn belt wide almost versus more locally adapted products. So I guess you need a mix of both.
Yeah, it's one of those that, as the DEKALB brand, generally we try to get as broad acre as possible, just because that gives us a bigger pile, gives us more reliability production. But we also have times where we're going to select something specifically for a region. I think like for your area, tar spot, crown rot. If we've got products that work on those in the I states, we're going to take those and know that's just where they stick. So we try to blend that when the opportunity for a regional lead comes in, we use it. But if we can go broad acre, we'd rather go broad acre just to help with some supply consistency, performance, more data points across.
Right. Well, and if you're a big seed company competing against smaller seed companies, one of the stories that the smaller companies like to use is, well, our stuff's more adapted to this small area that we're in, and that's where you farm, and that's why our stuff might be better than the big guy's stuff. Well, the challenge with that strategy, in my opinion, is, even if you farm in one county, the weather, the growing season, the conditions, that one county in central Illinois, one year might be like Iowa, one year might be like Ohio, and one year might be like Missouri. And so maybe you'd be better off with a product that is adapted to all those areas that your area might turn into. And if your growing environment was the same every year, then they'd be right. But, I think we all realize that your growing environment is not going to be the same every year. So, even if you aren't farming in 4 states, having a product that performs well across a broad geography should, I think, give you more stability, better performance over time. There might be an individual year here or there where something that's not adapted to other areas is better in your spot, but over time, and farmers want, you guys all want yield, you want consistency, you want standability, but that consistency, dependability, it doesn't trump yield, but it's up there towards the top of what I think guys are looking for.
Yeah, and that's like you talked about the weather part of it. That's the key to my job too, is because we test across so many locations, is understanding those weather year-to-year anomalies, and also what parts of the U.S. are analogs, because we can go back and look and say the weather was seen in Western Illinois in 2024 was
Mhm.
similar to what weather we saw in North Carolina per se
Okay.
in 2026, so that we can, or
Mhm.
25, so that we can know, well, if we have weather, this is our average.
Yeah.
We didn't get it this year.
So how do you? I mean, you're borderline genius, so maybe you can just keep track of all that. How do we keep track of those? You called it an analog when this area this year was kind of similar to that area last year. Do we have a system that's kind of identifying those patterns for you and keeping track of that stuff?
Well, so we have a system that identifies similar patterns across the U.S. So we use that in all of our testing footprint to understand if we're catching enough of the U.S.'s weather and soil scenarios correctly
Okay.
that resides within our breeding program. And so then it's kind of my role is to know what ones I've got to use and go in that system and compare
Okay.
to really pick to see what that regionalized, difference could be year to year, especially in areas that we have weather that is completely, is well outside the normal.
Right. One thing you bring up weather. I mean, we obviously there's weather data out the wazoo out there that's publicly available. We've got our climate system. There's no shortage of weather data out there, but I've always thought there was opportunity to tie that weather
Yep.
directly to performance and identify, is it the product or is it the weather or what is it that drove performance? And, you can look at hot nighttime temperatures, you can look at rainfall. I mean, rainfall is pretty easy to track, and that's the kind of the basics. But to me, there's things with temperature, particularly nighttime temperature, maybe the frequency of the rain, the duration of the dry period, the timing of the dry period. I mean, all that stuff influences performance.
Yep.
And, is there more we could do to track and correlate and dial all that back to, okay, this is what happened and this is maybe why it happened?
Yeah. And we're currently working on doing that and building those models. So within breeding, we're using a tool, we call it Digital Twin. And it's kind of that we can take a weather scenario from any historical weather pattern. Anytime we have enough data, which for us generally goes back about a decade and a half to get enough of the mass data to do it. And we can plot I may plot a new hybrid. So like our 11387 that we just launched, I may take and compare it in, the I-74 corridor to 6422 in 2023 and see how their yield performance is different.
Okay.
And look at those differing weather patterns and how they influence it compared to a known hybrid that we somewhat know what weather is causing the challenges or causing the success.
Right.
And that data continues to build to where hopefully the long term is that we become predictive.
Right.
To where we can map out this hybrid, we expect this performance out of it under these scenarios that could be your future weather.
And then last year in particular, disease was a huge factor in yield, which that's always tied to the weather too. I mean, where you have the right weather environment for a disease, you're probably going to have that disease.
Yep.
And so, then is it the weather? Is it the disease? It's kind of both.
Yep.
And we saw some huge swings in performance last year based on southern rust, which was a bit of a wild card. We don't, I would say about 1 year out of 5, I expect to have enough southern rust to care about.
Yep.
And that was, I have heard, and I might ask you this question, I did hear some stories. People are talking about, a green bridge that exists from the south up and just the different, there's more corn being grown in the south, less cotton. There's green corn from Florida to Canada, all summer long, and people are speculating that we're making it easier for southern rust to be a problem in the Midwest. I'm not a pathologist. I don't really even have an opinion on that, but is that something you've heard people talking about? And are you? I mean, we've got really good southern rust resistance, but we haven't necessarily deployed it in places that don't normally have southern rust.
Correct.
Is that something you think we need to change?
So it's something we keep looking into. I mean, I'm a plant physiologist by training, not a pathologist. So I have to rely on our plant health team to tell me what the major challenges like that are.
Yeah.
But what we do see is we are seeing a higher, in maybe weather the last few years, higher frequency and farther north movement of southern rust.
Right.
We don't believe as of now that that's a change in the whole environment and system. It's more just a year by year pattern.
Right.
When we look at though at our germplasm, as we continue to try to guard against, because I mean, southern rust can be managed with fungicide, but the easiest protection is in the seed.
Right.
We continue to adapt more southern germplasm into like our 110, 105 day pools, which is naturally pulling some more southern rust in than what we historically would have seen. So you're kind of seeing it. I mean, there are two different germplasm pools, probably early for your audience, but 5626 versus 10535.
Right.
The 5626 is a little more 110 day type germplasm. You get that southern rust from the 110 traditional DEKALB, whereas the 10535 is 105 true Iowa, Northern Illinois germplasm. You don't see that tolerance. It does other things good for those areas.
Right.
But I think as a brand, you'll start to see a little bit more of that come in, just as we've seen the yield with some of that germplasm, seen some of the durability, and try to influence a little bit more into our 105 pools.
So I'll put my farmer hat on. I'll pretend like I don't know the answer to this question, and I'll ask you a farmer kind of question. So Josh, you mentioned southern rust, you mentioned tar spot, you mentioned crown rot. You've talked about adaptability, yield. You guys have got more hybrids than I can count. They change all the time.
Yep.
Why don't you just make me 5 or 6 that have all those things and yield really good and stand forever and have good grain quality, and you know what I want. Just put it all in one hybrid and sell it to me.
We would do that if we could. I make a joke. One of the breeders, he's at our Evansville station, Sandeep. First time I'm walking with him in Texas, I go, Sandeep, there's nothing I don't need much. I just need yield, standability, and it can't get disease. If you can give me that, we're gonna have an easy year. He looked at me and he goes, the day I find that's the day I retire.
Yeah.
So what we see is just the hard part about when we look at hybrids and anyone selecting for any crop is anytime you select for one thing, you're selecting away from another.
Right.
And so it's a balance of finding that how we can select for the most, but also get that, especially yield, because that's where we've kind of seen the trade-off historically has been. As we get products that are more defensive, better stable agronomics, that top end yieldness goes out of there, and we may sacrifice some other agronomics in there. And so we have to try to balance. In my role, we have to have the yield you expect because revenue is the king to be in a profitable farm, but we also have to bring in enough disease tolerance agronomics that you can harvest that yield and not spend a fortune to keep it.
Right. Well, where I think it gets really frustrating for farmers and frustrating for our dealers is that, so you've got this hybrid that I'm going to pick crown rot because that's near and dear to my heart. You've got a hybrid that's pretty tolerant to crown rot that, let's say it's, 20 bushel under in top end yield potential.
Yep.
But in the presence of crown rot, it's going to be 50 bushel better than the hybrid that would beat it by 20 in the absence of crown rot.
Yep.
And so when you're saying, does that hybrid have high yield? Well, it depends. Do you have crown rot?
Yep.
If you've got crown rot, hell yes, it's got high yield.
Yep.
If you don't, then no, it's going to get its tail kicked. And, we kind of know where these diseases are more likely to show up, but they don't always show up.
Yep.
And, and when they don't, the hybrid that's got higher yield potential, less disease resistance is probably going to win.
Yep.
But you have to recognize that if you have the problem that, you selected a hybrid because it would handle a problem you're worried about, you have to kind of be willing to let it lose if you don't have the problem, which is the reason you picked it in the first place.
Yep.
And we kind of overreact to, right now, anything that had good southern rust tolerance last year is pretty easy. They're all sold out, by the way, so don't ask for any more of those. But, and we didn't have as much crown rot, pressure last year. And so, you mentioned 5626, not our best crown rot hybrid, pretty good on southern rust, had an amazing year last year. It's a 106-day corn that, we sell very little under 110 in my market. And it was yielding the same as, guys 112, 114 day corn last year in some cases. And, not very many 106-day hybrids do I ever have somebody tell me, hey, that thing happened to be, I was a little nervous about planting it because I thought maybe it was too early and turned out to be my best corn. So, and then, and I kind of almost hate it when that happens, because then you start counting on it, and you don't want to do that either. But, so anyway, and again, if you have questions for Josh or for me, please put them in the chat. And I warned Josh that, we are live here, and people, a few of you do actually watch live. I love my live audience. I got to meet an audience member a couple weeks ago. So I had a young man reach out to his FSR and dealer in the area, and he thought it would be cool to meet the Ask the Agronomist guy. So Henry, I know you're not a live watcher, but I hope you catch this episode, and I wanted to let you know that I really appreciated the opportunity to meet with you guys there in Virginia a week or so ago. And looks like, hey, he's on live. All right. So Henry, I don't want to make you feel embarrassed or anything that I'm calling you out. I didn't know you were on here. So good morning. This is something you'll miss in your new role. You won't get opportunities to do this kind of stuff as much. So Henry, so there's 3 generations of his farm family was there. There was another father and son and another neighbor there. So we had about 6 farmers, crop specialists from Sunrise FS, Zach Bennis, who's our FSR, and me, all in a nice loft above a garage, kind of a meeting area, table about this size, all set around the table. We just shot the what for a couple hours, and then went to lunch, and those guys, and I was very humbled by this, that they thought it was somehow cool that I was there, which I told them, I said, this is not some honor for you guys to have me here, but thank you. I'm kind of envious of those guys, because they're multi-generational farm families, which that to me, that's cooler than what I do.
Yep.
But we had a great conversation, and I told Zach later, if I could work myself into a job in my career where all I did was that all day long,
that's the dream.
I would do that, and I get to do a lot of that in my role today. So I'm thankful for that. But that was a really good meeting, and thanks for getting on live. I did challenge Henry to be on live, so because he has lots of questions. But I love my live audience, because you guys chatting in questions, I think improves the content. So you've thrown out, you've done a little name dropping with new hybrids, and we're getting plot seed of those. Thanks for the extra plot seed of 11387, by the way. We'll put that to good use, and we're going to get that stuff out, as broadly as we can. There was about 4 new products that my squad really got behind pretty aggressively in crop planning, and so we're excited to see those, and it's always a balancing act. I remember a day back in the early mid 2000s when we really were making some huge strides in performance. We sold 3 hybrids probably represented 75% of what we sold. And I have a few dealers and some sellers that were around in those days that they kind of missed the good old days when they didn't have to manage a portfolio of 40 hybrids to sell a lot of corn. And I like having a lot of hybrids. I mean, I bet you probably do too. I plant 10 plus on my farm. I buy hybrids in 16 bag increments so I can plant all the hybrids that I want to look at. And I always challenge my customers, when you all get to planting 10 hybrids, your life will be better and our life will be better, I think. But nobody really wants to do that, even if you're only planting one company, which a lot of people plant more than one company. But even if you're planting one company, you're probably not going to plant 10 different hybrids typically. And so as a sales team, we're always trying to zero in on the ones that we think everybody's going to want. And grow big piles of those, and it's a real challenge to A, pick the right ones, B, grow the right amount of the right ones, and C, hope that the weather that you have the year after you make those decisions is kind to the ones that you picked. And we struggle through that every year. That this year maybe more than most with the the wild card of southern rust, influencing performance in ways that we don't necessarily expect. Tar spot, unfortunately, for those of you that are fighting tar spot, that's kind of become something you can count on to have some level of tar spot pressure. Now, we did go through, I would say, in 22, 23, and 24, it was present, but not as impactful as it was in 21 and 25. But you've always got pockets, even in those 3 years I mentioned that I don't consider to be bad tar spot years. There were places where it was a big problem. And so, we're continue to work, and Josh and his predecessors have made some great strides in, selecting products that have better tar spot tolerance than, what we had out there 5 years ago. And sounds like there's a step change coming in the level of tar spot protection we'll be able to offer. How long that resistance holds up, once we all start using it, will be interesting to see.
Yep. And that's always the challenge when we're selecting for any of these major diseases, is trying to assess the actual tolerance level, because we want to get it as close to, what we would call a 1 on our scale as possible.
Right.
It's usually not obtainable. 2s, 3s is usually as good as you're going to get with genetics.
Right.
But then also mapping out, the
got to be careful there. You're talking about numbers and ratings and tar spot. Those things don't necessarily go together.
Yep. So that's all fair. We'll call it above average.
I tease because I love.
So
we get feedback all the time. Hey, you guys don't have tar spot ratings yet. Well, we do. It's just they're kind of the good, better, best kind of ratings. And I know some. You're a beef genetics guy too. There's a lot of seed stock producers that they categorize their bulls as good, better, best. So you don't get a 1 to 9 rating on a bull typically. And we don't have 1 to 9 ratings on everything, but we do characterize, our products. We know which ones are weak and which ones are better, and we do have that information available. But Josh gets a lot of feedback from a lot of people. Sometimes the feedback is not kind. That hey, when we're going to have ratings for this, and when we're going to have ratings for that, and you might explain, how we get the ratings we've got on the things that we do have ratings for.
Yeah. So when we've got ratings on our numerical, so what we would call our key 15 agronomic traits. So that's stalks, roots, emergence, disease. Our whole breeding organization, from the time a hybrid is created to the time that we deploy it, which that's, roughly a 4-year span that we're getting full testing on that hybrid in field. We're collecting data and rating it, from 1 to 9 on that tolerance, 1 being better, 9 being worse. We take that across all the sites, all the years, and we put together what we call a bluff, which all a bluff is just a statistical value to take out any of the outliers or get rid of some of the environmental noise and some of the pressure, specifically in disease. And so then when we deploy a product, that gives us our base to start from, of where that one's going to rate compared to its predecessor. So then when I go through and look and say, my best product on southern rust is this product, the new product is right there with it, then we line those ratings together, because the bluff should line up well. Then we line those. If it's above or below, that's how we adjust it. When you look at disease like tar spot or crown rot, things that are a little more dynamic, that there's more influence of pressure and regional differences. That's why we don't go to 1 to 9s on things like that, because, like for example, crown rot, a 3 in Western Illinois may be a 7 in Nebraska.
Right.
Same, we see it a little bit even with tar spot, of some regional differences of a product that we may have called a 5 in, at I-80. As we get tar spot into Southern Indiana, Southern Illinois, that one actually does okay. And so that's why we've kind of swayed away from those as of today, while we try to build that data set to understand, can we get rid of some of that environmental noise that's in there?
Well, and I think my understanding too is with most diseases, we want an assay or we want to be able to create consistently heavy pressure.
Correct.
Know that we're testing in a high pressure environment, because you're right, in the absence of the disease, everything's 1.
Yep. It's all good.
And when you've got lots of locations that there's no disease, well, it's not really a 1. It's still as susceptible as it is with the disease.
Yep.
It only looks like a 1 because there's no disease there.
Correct.
And I think that's maybe kind of what the BLUPs maybe help a little bit, because if you got a lot of locations where there was no disease, and you give it a 1 because there's no disease there, that's all you can give it when there's no disease there, is give it a good rating. But that's not really real, because the only reason it looked like a 1 is that disease wasn't there.
Yep.
And so that's why the pathology group does their inoculated trials, where they make damn sure there's a lot of disease there. And then you can get good ratings. If you're only using, what do you guys call it? Natural or adventitious, ratings, where it just happened to happen, you kind of need to identify just those locations and only rate for that there. We've kind of learned that the hard way with crown rot. Crown rot only occurs in certain environments, and you need to only do your crown rot observations there. Because if you average in all the data from all the locations that didn't have crown rot, it makes everything look like it's pretty good on crown rot.
Yep.
But those of us who have crown rot know that's not true. So we do learn, and we have made some, I would say, huge strides in crown rot. We've made good progress in tar spot. Still work to be done there, and when we get to where we want to be, the disease will probably move to a new spot, and we'll have to start the process all over again.
Yep.
Because if there is some true genetic resistance developed to tar spot, that's going to pretty quickly get used throughout, a lot of germplasm.
Correct.
And going to give that pest, ample opportunity to overcome whatever we're using to control it. So we'll see how that goes. So morning, Adam, by the way. Adam Henniger joined on as well. So Adam, former colleague of mine, that's now working on the dealer side of things. But so appreciate you guys joining in live. Again, if anybody has a question, please shout it out. So Josh, I teased you a little bit about your passion for silage.
Yep.
So what's your connection to the silage market?
Well, so my connection actually goes back a long way. So I'm a Missouri boy.
Yeah.
Grew up on a beef farm there, and went to University of Missouri, did all my undergrad and graduate research actually in forage crops.
Okay.
So after that, married my wife, and we actually moved back to Southern Illinois so she could go back to her family's dairy. So connected very closely there to the silage market, and making sure we've got, for us, products that work for ours to get the most out of our cows. And then even on the beef side, just something that's good at feeding. And we continue to see that silage market actually increase too, just nationally. So it's become a bigger focus of the DEKALB brand, just to have a better focused presence there.
And you might, something I think guys would find interesting is, we see quite a bit of potential for Preceon, or our short corn in that market, which for a lot of people, they think the only thing you need to be good silage is tall and green. Yep. And it's not tall, but it does make good silage.
It does. So that's one of the exciting parts of, Preceon, our smart corn system is, when you look at it and you've got 6.5 foot tall corn, you're like, there's no way this is going to be good silage. But when you think about being able to stack the density, you're thinking about larger leaves, more leaf sheath, not really more ligneous stalk. You can get the tonnage you would see out of a normal product, but then your quality increases. You get more digestible fiber, more usability. So I was talking about my second year as a TA, they had come out with our agronomy experience trials for Preceon, and I come to my father-in-law and I'm like, hey, let's try some of this. And he's an old dairyman. He's been doing it his whole life. And he looks at me and he was like, how tall is it going to be? And I was like,
you didn't really want to answer that question.
I did not. I was like, he goes, well, I've been planting 70-27 for silage for years. He's like, how tall is it compared to that? And I go, maybe half. Yeah. And we went that whole year. He planted 20, we're on 20-inch rows. He planted 24 and 24 right next to each other, striped it throughout the field, two different Preceon hybrids. We went out there and walked it one day. He goes, I'm going to lose so much. Yeah. He goes, I'm going to have to chop another 45 acres for this junk. He gets out there, we start chopping, and we're weighing the trucks just to get the data, and he runs that first pass through the 7027. It's making 28, 30 tons, and he's like right where it should be.
Sure. Yeah.
Turns around, and the short corn, not even 7027, smacking him in the window, and this one's barely above the head.
Right.
And he looks at it, and he's like, "This is gonna be bad."
Yeah.
And he starts chopping, and I'm in the semi, and he calls over the radio, and he's like, "Why is it full already?" He goes, "What was left in that truck?"
Mm-hmm.
We go out and we weigh it, which of course we pushed the pressing on about 4,000 to 6,000 over what we had in 7027.
Right.
It actually ended up about 500 pounds more.
Mm-hmm.
He by the time he got done with that field, he looked at me and he was like, "How long till we can have a whole farm of this?"
Mm-hmm.
So he was like, "If it'll yield the same," he goes, "I don't have to worry about what I'm coming out on the other side to because I can't see through the corn."
Yeah.
He's like, I'm down for more of this."
That you comment about can't see through the corn. We've also gotten feedback from sprayer operators of, because you still short corn is tall enough that sometimes you still need a high boy.
Yep.
But you're at least above the crop rather than in the crop.
Yep.
Because a lot of times, and last year in particular, the crop was extremely tall last year. And, even guys with the highest high boy you can buy, they have the booms up on a 45-degree angle to get at least the end of the end of the boom's 20 foot above the crop. The center is 3 feet below the top of the crop. And then somewhere in the middle, you're at the right boom height. So it's not an ideal situation. And it's just a nicer day for the operator when you can kind of see where you're going and you're not watching tassels slapping the window of what you're driving. And so, you can, if you got a tall enough sprayer, you can kind of sort of get through anything.
Yep.
But it's a lot easier to get through 7-foot tall corn than it is 12-foot tall corn.
Yeah. And I know one that we don't think about that much. We've got some guys that are using a lot of the high boys, but they can't go if they're still shedding any sort of pollen. Because you plug the radiator.
Yeah.
As we've gotten into some of this Preceon, we've gotten the comments. It's like, now that the majority of it's down below my canopy, I'm not sucking it up in. They're like, as long as I got my belly pan right, I'm sucking air from the top.
Okay.
Instead of sucking pollen up through.
Huh. Cool. Yeah. Because I have had a lot of guys tell me they got to clean stuff out all the time because it just plugs with anthers and pollen and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, so interesting. So other things that we could talk about. So let's talk about the we talked a little bit about deployment and you're going to deploy plot seed. Let's talk a little bit about the crop planning process and how that goes, and how what goes into deciding how much you want to grow of a particular hybrid, and walk us through that process.
Yeah. So after December time period, when we roll out our new products to our agronomists and our field teams, we go through a process that we call future season forecasting. So that's where we would have our sales teams go out to their dealers, work within themselves to tell us, in an ideal world, I got to predict what is going to happen in 26, and then we'll grow for it and what I want to sell for 27. They give us an idea of, hey, here is the products and the volumes that I'd like to sell for 27. So once we get that feedback back, we go through and we look, okay, what products can we meet that demand on? Because the one thing we never talk about probably, as much commercially, is we got to grow all these parents.
Yes.
And so
that kind of blew my mind when I thought about that, because it's really hard to get the hybrids right, but to have the opportunity to get the hybrids maybe right, you had to grow the parents for the hybrids the year before. Which I don't get involved in that process. Thankfully, I can't do the one that I'm supposed to do right. He's got to do that one and the one before. So that just is crazy that you have to. There's a lot of inbreds involved in this, and until you grow the inbred, you can't make the hybrid, and you're going to have limitations on So you might have you might have X amount of a female, and when that demand request comes in, you might realize, oh man, it would take 3 times as much of that female to grow that much. So you just can't.
And that's where we come back to the field teams. And, if we have a product that it was hot, everyone wanted it. We didn't have the female. There was either something happens. It's the challenge. We farm like farmers, and sometimes they don't yield, or, we didn't predict right. And so then we give back the feedback of which ones we can go up and down on.
Right.
Let the field teams tell us, hey, if option number 1 is capped out, give me this as an option number 2.
Yeah.
Once we get all that feedback about the February time period, we sit down as a DEKALB crop team and we look at, okay, here's our big piles. Here's the stuff that is kind of the cornerstones within our lineup.
Mm-hmm.
This is the stuff we're going to grow an even bigger pile of. Because most hybrids we grow, an extra 20, 30% just for the environment, replants, carrying, things like that. We take a select subset of another ones and grow even bigger than that, because it's like, if we're going to run out of something, this is the guy that we can't run out of, because it's that one.
Right.
Then about this time
we
of year,
can still, by the way.
we can. We've unfortunately done that.
We try not to.
And then this time of year, we approve that plan and we send it out to our sites, and they start to contract acres. And from there, it's kind of a working on making sure they've got the seed in place where or in the places they need it, and building the inbred forecast for the 28th season now, actually.
Yeah. So, how many hybrids, and I know you're charged with keeping that number manageable. How many hybrids are we carrying in the brand in North America currently?
If you just count the U.S., we're covering about 240 hybrids, from 72 day all the way up to 120.
Okay. Yeah.
Throw Canada, and they have a few. They have more that we don't have, just because they do get into some sub 70 day hybrids.
I didn't even know there was such a thing. So what's the how much have we expanded the early side of corn?
Quite a bit.
I mean, it didn't used to go that low, right?
No, quite a lot. I mean, when you look at it, about 20, it would have been roughly like 2020, 2019. We really got into like the 75, 80 day material. So it's really been not even in the last decade that we've gotten down sub 80 day corns to now. It's not a lot of products, but I think we have 8 products sub 80 day.
So what, before that area was raising corn, was that all wheat, barley, canola?
Yep.
But they've got enough water to raise corn. It was just a growing season limitation. There wasn't corn early enough.
There wasn't, and the market for corn is held at strength. When you think the Dakotas into Canada, the other part of that is expansion of beef up there.
Okay.
So we now sell a decent amount of corn into the Dakotas and Manitoba, and that's a lot that's going into silage or cattle feed. As those feeders have expanded into those areas, they have to have corn, and for them, they pushed us to find the corn they can grow, not have to transport corn in.
So we're seeing a trend, and I know you guys see this, and you've actually adapted because of this, that we're growing a lot fuller season corn than we used to.
Yep.
Our number one volume hybrid's 118 day, which I'm not sure we've never had anything that late be our number one volume hybrid, have we?
No, I think 114 was our next closest when 64, 34, 35 was.
Yeah. So, and so they're growing. I mean, I've got an appetite for, fuller than that from guys, because, even with 120 day corn, we plant so early, and the growing seasons we've been having now, I'm not necessarily in the camp that, well, our climate has changed to what it is now, but we've been having years where we finish off high.
Yep.
You get about 60 days worth of August
at
the end of the growing season, it seems like. And when you plant 120 day corn in mid-April and get that weather, you're picking 13% corn at some point, even with 118, 20 day corn. So there's an appetite for later than that. How, we've moved early. How far late could we go?
That's a great question. There's a lot of parts of the world that are using 130 day, but that's all along the equator.
Okay.
Right now,
which would be a plant type that we wouldn't want,
and still got some daylight sensitivity to it.
So
there's some challenge bringing some of that, equator, that equatorial germplasm north.
So it's got a photoperiod kind of like soybeans do, sort of
similar to that. That's where we have to temperatize corn. That's actually Monmouth site was one of those old school sites that they brought a lot of the original
Mhm.
DEKALB
Yeah, I
germplasm.
think Don Bachman worked with
So-
that tropical stuff.
Yep,
Yeah.
Don was doing all of that work and brought tropical stuff and temperatized it to that. Kind of where you see some of these foundation lines that are in our 110, 115 day pipeline. Those products are out of Don Bachman's, work to temperatize that.
Cool.
We continue to look at that. I mean, we have a very strong emphasis on our 115 day pipeline, our 120, continuing to grow that and bring more products in there and more variety. Because what we're seeing is, everywhere is moving about 3 RMs, maybe 5 RMs in the last 10 years farther up than what we've seen. I mean, I walked field 6835 this year, 15 miles from Minnesota line. I mean, everyone with dryers, with earlier planting, all of these things, people are pushing, and we're seeing that trend and continue to try to have products to meet that. The other part we look at, and why we need some of these products too, is the thing in farming that has increased the fastest is planting speed.
Right.
Harvesting has really not sped up in the last 10 years that much, but planting speed has jumped.
Right.
So some of these later varieties give us the ability to just have that spread out window of harvest, so that maybe you don't have everything, because if it takes you a week to plant, but it takes you 6 weeks to harvest,
right,
gives you that optimal, that optimal moisture and optimal agronomics.
Right. And I talk with guys a lot about, in beans too, spreading your maturities more.
Yep.
Because we've got so many guys that they don't really want to plant anything earlier than a 110, because that's like early corn, and I don't want early corn. And we've still got guys that are skittish of anything later than 10 years ago, it was hard to get guys past a 116.
Yep.
You mentioned 7027 earlier. I get feedback from the 7027 fans that, why isn't everybody planting this corn? The people that grow it love it. They, as you well know, they won't quit planting it, and they won't let you quit growing it.
Nope.
And I think, if we would have launched 7027 as a new hybrid 3 years ago, it'd be a big freaking deal.
It would.
But it was around before 2019, which was a late plant, late year, and 120-day corn scared the hell out of people. In a year like that, a lot of guys returned it. I remember I got a call from a guy. He'd gotten rained out at some point with half a planter full of 7027, and it was like June 3rd when he could start planting again. He's like, "What, do I need to dump this out and get rid of it?" I said, "No, plant it." I said, "It'll be fine." I mean, and it was fine, but he was scared to death to plant 120-day corn the 3rd of June in central Illinois. And that experience, kind of put the brakes on that hybrid. And then since then, these full season hybrids have just gotten huge. And, it kind of, if we'd have released it 5 or 6 years later than we did, I think it would have been a big deal. It's still a big deal to a handful of people, but it's not really being used by the masses in my territory. But I think it could be. It just it's old enough now. We're not trying to restart that. But it's been hard to find something at that maturity that can perform like it. In so 120-day corn don't all go north well. And that was the wacky thing about 7027. It probably went north better than it went south, which made it kind of made it a bad fit in the day. Because the place where it works, they didn't want 120-day corn.
And that's what's weird. We're seeing an inverse of that now. We're hearing 120, 115, 120 in the Midwest. The South would like to see more early corn to run their heat, because one that they still sell their 7027 for them is 6208. They love it. The yields, they don't get the wind, so they don't have to worry about that. So they like that early corn to get out before heat, whereas the Midwest, we're really seeing that later corn given, one, yield, and two, that harvest interval, but finding the germplasm that is 120 and moves into central Illinois is much more rare.
Well, it needs to have the right agronomics to be healthy late. Because a really full season hybrid that you can't leave to last defeats the whole purpose.
It does.
You know? And so that's, I mean, that's kind of the magic of 7027 is it, you know, it's going to yield well, you know, and it's healthy as a horse. And generally it's in really good shape late season. And so you can leave that to last. And, you know, we've got, I won't name any names, but we've got some 116 plus stuff that is not leave to last kind of corn. And, you know, that gets those products in trouble in some cases because guys think, oh, I don't need to be in any hurry to get that out. Well, no, I'm sorry. You actually do need to be in a bit of a hurry to get that out. So as we're looking for that, you know, next generation of 120-day corn, you know, it needs to have that really outstanding late season health and standability so that you can finish your harvest in something that's still standing and maybe still 17 or 18% instead of 12. And I think you and everybody else knows that. It's just not easy to find that sometimes. So we're looking at the new 119 this year. I'm curious I mean, the breeding data looks really good. I don't know if it has the potential to be a 7027 replacement for me, but we keep looking for it because I know one of these years I warn all my 7027 fans, one of these years it will go away. And I'm just praying that I've got something that you would rather have before that happens.
Well, I can make the promise as much as I can that until we have something to replace it, we try not to get rid of hybrids until we do feel there's a strong replacement. And for me, coming from being an agronomist, I'm always skeptical until I've seen it in my area. So until it's proven, I don't like to get rid of a hybrid. Right.
No, sounds good to me. So, well, we're coming up close to time here. If you've got any questions, chat them in. But appreciate Josh for taking time out of his morning to sit with us here on Ask the Agronomist. And I'm really, you know, I'm as an agronomist, you know, I think most of my colleagues would agree with this. You know, that new product advancement time of year that's like Christmas for an agronomist. And it's nice. It happens about a month before Christmas. So if you're an agronomist, you kind of get two Christmases. You've got your work Christmas where the new hybrids come out, and then you've got the real Christmas. And, you know, so we always get excited about testing the new products. We pour through the data. We find the ones that, you know, and then there's a couple in this year's class that, you know, I'm calling BS on one of them right now. And I know you know which one I'm talking about. I won't name any names, but if that thing does again what you've seen it do, you know, that's pretty cool. You know, I got money says it won't do that, but it's going to be fascinating to see. So it's always fun to look at the new products. And you know, we talked about this whole crop planning process that we go through. You know, we've already told Josh how many bags we think we want to have available to sell to you in 27 of these new products based on how they've performed in 23, 24, and 25 in breeding, or maybe 23 and 24, or maybe in some cases just 25. And we've got another year coming, 26, right? And 26 is going to be different than 23, 24, and 25. And when it is, you know, you and I both know that things are going to be different. And that's really and you guys aren't sympathetic to our challenge. You just want what you want when you want it. We get that. And, you know, every now and then we try to explain why sometimes that's really hard to do. You did get a question in here, studying waterlogging tolerance. So that'd be what I would call wet feed, I think, because flooding is a problem in my county. Lots of heirloom varieties are good with flooding, but not as high yielding compared to hybrids. That's interesting. So I don't know where this gentleman is logging in from, but I get questions a lot on what we call, you know, for mucky ground, heavy ground, saturated soils, you know, what I call wet feet conditions. And, you know, and for me, you know, I'd like to have a good root system. I'd like to have really good crown rot tolerance because that can be where the crown rot is the worst. And, you know, I think there's maybe a function of nitrogen, you know, usage in there too, because, you know, wet saturated soils, it impacts, you know, oxygen, nutrition. I mean, it's everything. That's some of the hardest growing conditions. And, you know, that's a hard thing to test for in breeding.
And it's a complex thing because not everyone's wet feed is the same.
Right. Yeah. You know, is it a wet, low organic matter soil, or is it a wet, high organic matter soil? And how do you manage your nitrogen? And when was it wet? And how long was it wet? And So, that's a tough one. And, if we focus all of our breeding sites on, really, really wet situations, you're going to get some bad data quality, and you're going to have a hard time getting plots established. And so it's hard to test in some of these really, really unique environments. pH is one in some areas. Sand can be, a hard environment to test in. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that question specifically.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things I think about when I look at what we're doing as far as testing. We test across a lot of environments, so it's just narrowing that data out to look at which ones do better as we get to lower site numbers of sites that have specific instances, and calling those out, which is sometimes easy, sometimes not. The other thing with wet feet that I see is there's a balance of yield on some of these wetter soils. Lower yielding defensive products do well, like maybe why you see in some of those OPs, because you don't have that stress on that plant. That's some of the challenge we run into on wet acres, is they can sustain high yielding products because of the moisture level, but that high yield also zaps a lot of energy that would have been used for root regeneration, stalk diameter, things like that would help on wet. So it's how severe the flooding and wet is kind of balances that yield out sometimes in some of those agronomics.
Right. Well, it's kind of like that we were talking about with ground rot. If you've really got a problem, you're often better off with a lower yielding product that can handle the problem.
Correct.
Because the higher yielding product that can't handle the problem, the fact that it had more potential is irrelevant, because it ain't getting anywhere near its potential. So you're better off starting with something that has less potential, but get closer to its potential, versus that hybrid that could win the NCGA yield contest, and you're going to get 25% of its potential in your environment. So, but we had when Chris Calla was here. Chris was for a couple of years. He was really, really big on wet feet stuff. He actually parked a semi tanker of water next to a plot site and flood irrigated the plot and tried to create a wet feet environment and tried to characterize products for that. He only did that. He did it successfully one year. The second year he did it unsuccessfully, and after 50% success rate with something that was that much work, that was the end of that. So it's hard to create that environment artificially, and there's so many variables that go into okay, why did this hybrid perform in this environment? But that's a tough one. But it's you got to kind of go with what you've, and I get frustrated sometimes when guys want to only look at what happened on their farm. But if your farm is that unique of an environment, you have to kind of pay attention to what's going on your farm. If you're farming, kind of typical corn belt, soil environment, I think you need to look at, a lot more than just your farm when you're evaluating products. But if you've got a super unique environment like that, you do have to be careful with, what data that's coming from completely different environments would tell you, because it's probably not applicable to you. And that's one of the challenges we have sometimes with older products that just seem to have a 6618 for me.
Found its niche.
I've got some guys that they can't break that thing. I mean, it's just always one of their best. And I feel bad. It's it's going to get retired. Kind of has been, I think, or close to it
for
anyway.
27.
Yeah. So I've I got a couple guys that if they can find a pallet or two of it, they might stick it in the barn and then we're covered for 27. But you'll run into that where it's just, there's something about the soil, the way the guy farms, I was talking with a guy the other day that he's having great success with products that other people haven't had success with. And he's kind of a high yield, high management guy. He's got great fertility, fungicide practices, high rates, premium products, doing, poster child for fungicide management, and he's raising 290 bushel corn with hybrids that other people won't plant again. And it's making him nervous. And I said, it's, the guys that don't like that hybrid, they don't farm like you farm.
Correct. Their system's different.
Right. And so I don't think you should be afraid because it failed for them, because they weren't managing it right. You are. but there's a lot of diversity out there and a lot of different management styles and a lot of different, I've got hybrids that I would be fairly comfortable not getting fungicide.
Yep.
I don't like anything to not get sprayed, but I do have an arsenal of products that I would be willing to put out there on a guy that doesn't like using fungicide.
Yep.
And you got to have that, because not everybody's going to do that. So anyway, well, we are at time, and Josh and I both have places to be. So thanks for everybody that joined us live. Josh, thank you for your time. It was fun.
Appreciate being on.
These episodes where I have a guest are always the fan favorites. Less of Lance is better for people. So having somebody else here is always fun for me too. And appreciate you taking the time. And we'll see you all in 2 weeks. So take care.